Hey everyone, so I just got off a call with Brett and Kenneth from Kelly Partners Group. It's a very interesting conversation. I was able to record a fair piece of that interview, and I hope you enjoy this. It's good to speak to a CEO of a company that I'm interested in to just get a little bit more information. Look, I hope you enjoy. Here it is. Just telling me before anyway about how you think the opportunity is nearly endless in your eyes.
So Andrew, in Australia, there is two certainties, death and taxes. We think there's certainties in other parts of the world, but we're not experts in other parts of the world. So our circle of competence is Australia and accounting. So it's Australia, accounting, and we know that there's 32,000 accounting firms. There's well over 22 billion in revenues within those firms. Our segment, private business owners, sort of smaller, medium-sized enterprise firms, is 12.5 billion. Our revenues this year we expect to be 58 million, so it's really no percent of a market that we think is obviously very large. So if we can grow consistently, the largest 10 firms, sort of in the top 10 firms in Australia, you need 120 million of revenues. We're at 57, 58. So, if we could end up a top 10 firm, we'd have 120 million or more of revenues. Given our margins post-partner base partnership distribution is sort of 35%. That's a good sized business by earnings. So you've got about 42 million of earnings. We would own half of that. The EBITDA line, say 21 less than tax, 30% is maybe 15 million NPAT. Now that'll take time to get there. We've published a 5-year plan that says we can get to 80 million. But at that size, we expect to trade on a multiple that reflects the growth nature of our business, pay a monthly dividend, have nearly 100% cash conversion, have a return on invested capital of 27, 28%, return on equity of around 48%, and net debt to EBITDA that's fallen by nearly 50% over 5 years. We think the opportunity is compelling, although not necessarily exciting to everyone but ourselves.
Oh, that leads to a few questions. All right. First one is, you said that if you think about the market size, let's talk about that first. My question would be, are you worried about deal flow?
No.
Obviously, an accounting firm that wants to, the guy who's running it or the lady who's running it who wants to retire and they're looking for an exit. Are you seeing competition in trying to chase after these acquisitions?
So no, we don't. We don't see competition. What we know is that 50% of the firms, based on the published data, are looking for a succession plan within 5 years. And so there's an enormous amount of deal flow. Now, do you want all that deal flow? No. What you want is a big funnel, and you want to choose the best firms to partner with. So not all firms are equal in terms of values and quality of their systems, processes, their people, and their clients. So we want to run them through that funnel and just choose the best. But because of the amount of firms out there, you can be choosy and just have very good businesses join you.
Do you feel like you spend a lot of your time evaluating the acquisition targets? Is that what you spend most of your time doing, or what do you feel like?
Yeah, I spend most of my time looking after the partners, the 54 equity partners in the businesses that we own, and then I spend the next most amount of time speaking to firms who are potentially new businesses within the group, and then I spend a third most amount of my time on high quality candidates to join our businesses. So my role is really focused around the people, so the right people in the partnerships, the right next generation businesses and partners, and then the next group of high performing people that we're trying to get into the business.
Yeah, cool. So if acquisitions is a very important part to the growth of the business, and that's where you see the total addressable market, that's what you need to keep building into. Why the dividend? Why pay a monthly dividend at all? Why not just keep the money and just use it to leverage your acquisitions?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So, if I could ask Warren Buffett one question, it would be, if you had a company like ours in Australia, would you pay a dividend? Now, my speculation is that he would say, well, they don't have a dividend imputation system in the US that we have here. So he's always cited the reason he doesn't pay a dividend is twofold. One, he can get a better return in the business by holding on to that money, and two, he couldn't bear paying the double tax that exists. You pay corporate tax and then the recipient pays tax. Here in Australia with dividend imputation, the 30% tax rate paid by the company gets passed on as a franking credit, essentially a tax credit to the recipient in Australia. So it's very efficient from a tax perspective to pay dividends. And the way we structure our acquisitions, so that's the first point. The second point is the way we structure our acquisitions, we largely fund with debt. So we don't need equity. We don't need to issue shares or raise equity to do additional acquisitions because they're debt funded, and debt's historically cheap. And because we structure the debt at the subsidiary level, creates alignment with the partners who are partnering on the transaction with us. So, if you could continually do deals where you don't need equity, you don't need to issue shares, raise equity, would you be happy to debt finance them? Well, we debt finance them to a moderate degree and then aggressively pay them down so that total debt load's falling. We think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess if let's say any of your large shareholders would probably enjoy you guys growing. Like if you've got return on equity and return on invested capital in the 20+% range, that's a far better use of. I'm not going to find a better investment easily. I'd prefer you to keep my money, keep the dividend for you, and do it and keep it.
Yeah, if we thought that we could do more deals faster.
Sorry, say it again.
Like if we thought that by hanging on to that capital, we could do more deals faster, then we might be tempted to do that. But we're not sure that we can do more deals faster with more capital because we're really just trying to pick out the best firms through our funnel, and we've got more than ample capital to do that. We think that in this type of business, like aggressively managing the cash flow and ensuring that, the partners that own the 49%, they get paid the dividend every single month. And so if you own shares with me in the 51%, then I'm happy that you get paid every month in exactly the same way as the internal partners do, so that there's full alignment between the external partners and the internal partners. Now that could change in the future if we think that, there's a better use of the capital internally. We'd be open to changing that, but the discipline to focus on cash and pay growing dividends, it drives a discipline all the way through the business that I think is hugely helpful. And look, frankly, any shareholder that's getting that dividend and feels really offended, they can either donate it to their favorite charity or just call their broker and buy some more KPG shares.
Yeah, that's right. You can obviously just reinvest it, obviously,
yeah.
But yeah, no,
and there's no tax leakage. So for an Australian shareholder, there's no tax leakage in doing that. They get the dividend, they get the franking credit, they can just repurpose it back into some more shares.
Now, it's good so that's for the Australian investor. Now you've got some big international investors that are coming on board, and that's definitely part of that as well. But they're obviously going to be in their own tax jurisdictions and have issues with double taxation. Is there a point where you sort of think maybe our investor base is actually not just, we shouldn't just worry about the Australian shareholder, we actually should think of this worldwide?
Absolutely. So I think thinking about the structure of the business long-term makes sense, whether, it's best domiciled in Australia or on a US exchange, and then what that would mean for your capital allocation policy. I think all of that we'll think of as we become larger and more relevant. But for now, it's a very successful structure that we run, but it doesn't mean that we don't think about it intensely all the time.
Cool. Let's go back a little bit now, just because I think it would be interesting. I don't actually know the story at all myself. I haven't read it anywhere. But why did you? How did you come up with the idea to start the business? Like you started back in what 2006, 2005, somewhere around there.
2006. I left school. I was an undergraduate chartered accountant at Price Waterhouse. I did nearly 5 years there. I left. I joined an investment bank. I didn't know, I lost that job. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad gave me 2 books. One's called Think and Grow Rich. The other one's called How to Influence People, or How to Win Friends and Influence People. And out of that book, I realized that while I knew a lot, technically, I didn't know much about leading and managing people. Although I'd played a lot of sport and I'd done that in a sporting context, I thought that's where I really need to focus. So I wrote to 80 prominent Australians, didn't know what I wanted to do, and asked them to spend some time with me. I interviewed 34 of them, former prime ministers, billionaires, all sorts of interesting people from the arts and other industries. I published that, made it a national bestseller, went back into chartered accounting. I'd been reading about Warren Buffett, and I just thought that that accounting firms were a natural Buffett-style business. And I found that in the mid-70s, he did invest in H&R Block, and so he similarly recognised the consistent nature of these businesses. I thought that in Western countries, there's no real political consensus for governments to stop spending money, which means that tax rates will have to rise, which means that people that are working hard running businesses will need better accounting and tax, in particular tax advice. So I thought, look, these are businesses that have those Buffett qualities, but are very often just poorly run. They're run by technical people rather than people that think about the business of the business. And as a young person, I'd worked in these businesses and thought they were horrible places to work. They were no good for the people that worked in them and worse for the clients. And I thought, well, you know, I came home one night. I was in a third firm I'd been through at this point, and I said to my wife, look, they promised me to make me a partner, and this was the deal that was written down, and now they've offered this. It's completely different. I just can't work with people that don't do what they say. And so she said, why don't you start your own firm? And at that point, I was so sick of accountants. I thought, I can't deal with these people, the way they behave. And it wasn't that they were bad people sort of lying. It was just that they weren't organized when they made an offer. And so when you came and said, okay, well, you said this, now you got to do this, they were like, oh shit, I've checked the numbers now and it doesn't really work. And it's like, well, you should have checked the numbers up front. So I recognized that they were just like other business owners that weren't that well organized, which was ironic given that they were advising business owners. And so I thought,
Yeah, cool.
well, I said to, I had a couple of colleagues who were saying, look, can you start a firm with us and help us? And so I sort of took a deep breath. I rang a couple of my mates and they said, we're surprised you haven't already started a firm. So I stepped back and I said, look, I'd read about 3,000 books through this process on business and life and what everything was about. And so I sort of wrote a business plan and a model for how a chartered accounting firm that I would actually have wanted to work in would actually firstly behave, you know, the values that it would actually believe in and how it would then behave. And I said to a couple of my mates, well, you know, if you wanted to start a firm, this is what it would have to be like. And so I, you know, through the experience, which was, I'd had very extensive experience at this point, I said, you know, partnerships where there are 4 people and everyone owns 25% and they all pretend they're all in charge, they don't work. They don't work for the people. No one makes a decision. You can't get any forward movement. So I came up with this 50.1, 49.9 partnership model, an owner-driver model. I've been studying private equity groups globally. So I'd been looking at the structures they were using. And I said, okay, I think that works. And I'd been looking at sort of great businesses. So Walmart, great book called Made in America by Sam Walton, says, go to small places and get big before, you know, anyone notices. Make sure your back office is amazing. So he had this huge screen like NASA of all of his scoreboards. And then I looked at McDonald's in terms of their unique branding from a franchise point of view and productization of a hamburger ultimately. And I said, well, could I come up with a productized offer to a private business owner that could help them get from where they are to where they want to be? And we called that a flight plan. So I said, okay, so from a people point of view, I've got to be like Disneyland, a place people want to come and work at, whether they get paid or not. From a process point of view, I've got to be like Walmart in the back office and Macca's in the front office. And then from a client point of view, I have to know exactly the type of client. So this is a private business owner who we said wants to go somewhere, has the attitude they want to do things, throw a few punches and grow something. So the real go-getters were our type of people. And then financially, I needed to have a very clear financial model. And I said, you know, we'd aspire to the sort of financial rigor of Berkshire Hathaway, and we'd be able to prove that, you know, if you came with our model, you just do better, not in the short term. You might get a bigger pay rise from somewhere else, but you could grow very significant wealth over the long term in our model. And so we said, you get a base partnership distribution, you would get your equity distribution, your equity would value up over time. You could buy Kelly Partner shares ultimately that would be listed. You'd be able to invest in our investment office, a sort of funds management business, and we'd help you buy the property. And if you looked at that offer to a director and you did it over many, many years, I'd always say to people, I can make you, if you're prepared to work with me, we can make you wealthy over 10 years, but I can't make you wealthy over 10 minutes. So I designed a 10-year partnership agreement that if you join Kelly Partners, you have to sign a 10-year partnership agreement. You leave in the first 5 years, there's a big discount. You leave in the second 5 years, big discount, etc. So all these things I was layering in because of the experience I'd had. And they were the operational things. I designed a thing called the Kelly Partners Business System, which is a progress pyramid, where I said, if you don't have the right mission up front, that you don't believe that you're here to actually make a difference to someone somewhere, then you can't really go anywhere. You need clear values. You've got to have a clear strategy. You need a clear structure. I'd call that foundational. On top of that, all that people, process, clients, financial, brand, risk, growth, and succession, that would all be operational, and we'd have a very clear model for what we do. We document everything we do. So we do a lot of acquisitions. We've done 43 so far, but it's all part of a manual that's all documented. And this is how we do it. This is how we think about it. So, from an academic, sort of an academician's point of view, what is the best reading in, book review? What's the best literature on acquisitions? What does it tell you to do and not to do? How do you build that into an actual documented and systemized process so you can keep continuing it? So, for example, transformative acquisitions just destroy value in 97% of cases. Here's 15 studies that prove that. So who actually makes money out of acquisitions? People that do smaller acquisitions, but they do them consistently so they can document, systemize, and understand, what works and what doesn't, and be able to step off nimbly off left foot and right foot. So this was kind of the mindset, like a real intensity of how do you build a business that can stand for 100 years. The top 10 largest firms in our industry globally are all over 100 years old. So it's possible to build a 100-year institution. How do you actually build in from the bottom up a way of understanding why we're here, what are our values, and then documenting that and systemizing that. And as Jim Collins, since we started, we've made every single person that joined the firm, we give them a copy of Jim Collins' Good to Great. We give them a copy of Raving Fans, and we say, if you're going to have a common culture, you have to have a common language. Our common language is expressed in these books. You need to understand, what is a BHAG, what is our hedgehog, exactly what is a flywheel, what are the 6 parts of it, what are we trying to do, how do we think about what we're doing? Do you understand that how you think leads to what you do, and what you do leads to habits, and habits are actually what you get in the end. So, with that seriousness of intent, you work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. You do that for 3 years. You don't go on holidays. And I had, I was married. We had 2 young children, and I had, Beck's fantastic, and my wife, who's been hugely supportive as an accountant herself, really understands what we're trying to do. And it all came down to, I hated working in these firms that didn't run like businesses, that seemed to be run by people that weren't very interested in the firm, didn't really want to build anything great. Hey mate, everything will be all right. When you're the boss, of course, everything will be all right. But what about the most junior people? Is it going to be a great place for them to work so that they can develop their potential and actually make the contribution they're trying to make and lead the life they want to live? Or is it just some place where, some fat cats is on top and doesn't give a shit about anyone else? So that's what I'd seen in our industry. I thought the values in our industry were largely self-centered, people that were pretty impressed with themselves. And I was like, can't we be radically different to that by choosing people that were very keen to be people that were interested in other people, that would do exactly what they said, that would work as part of a team, want to build something really great. So that's kind of the depth of thinking that's been involved in the business. And all we're doing each day is just sort of turning the flywheel. I always remember saying to the guys, like, Collins makes really clear, at first you're just pushing basically shit uphill. You're just pushing this flywheel. You're trying to get a bump. Half the time it's coming back, smashing the head, and that's how it feels. But if you really stick at it, and as a team you're shoving it, over time you just feel momentum, and that momentum is hugely important in a business.
Yeah, awesome. That was a pretty epic answer. In terms of, you were talking about when you're on board, your the junior partners, and you're sort of acquiring these businesses and you're getting them under your sort of, you're putting them into your business model that you want them to run by. When you said also a little earlier that you're spending maybe a third of your time with your partners.
Yeah.
What are you doing to make their businesses more efficient, and like how do you make them a better accounting practice in the first place? Like, is that you're spending a third of your time with them? So I'm assuming you're helping them somehow. So what is that? What does that help?
So we have hundreds of pages, Andrew, of unique and documented intellectual property. If you're like a business in a box, how do you run these businesses better? So it's around what we call the Kelly Partners business system, which is locked around this progress pyramid, we call it. We know that people more than anything want to make progress. So we break the business down into 12 parts and we work through each of those businesses. So in a documented way against best practice from other industries. We don't look at accounting firms. You know, no one would look at our industry to get inspired. We look at great companies and great institutions to get inspired. And so through, you know, when I say we're working with partners, we're like, right, what is the mission of this business? You know, why does this business exist? Well, it exists to help private business owners be better off, right? What does that mean? Help them to be healthier, wealthier, and wiser. Why is that important? Because it's the private business owners in Australia provide 70% of all employment, and nobody can have a meaningful life without employment. So that's the depth that you want your partners to understand. So, you know, what you believe leads to what you do, and what you do becomes habits, and what your habits are become, you know, ultimately the destiny of you and your business and your family. So what I've done right from the beginning is work very hard at this ideas level. You know, why does this business exist? This business exists to help private business owners be better off. What does better off mean? That they're healthier, that they're wealthier, that they're wiser, which means they can grow employment, because employment is absolutely foundational to a dignified life. And if we get the boss right, then the little person actually wins, right? So getting at each of these levels. And so when I'm trying to train and coach our people and our partners, it's right. Well, why are we here? Great. What are our core values? Our core values are be people for others, do what you say, work as part of a team. What does that mean? This is how we put it into our recruitment process. This is how we put it into our assessment process of our people. This is how we lead, how we speak when we're talking about why we do what we're doing, what's working, what's not. It's got to be within that framework. And so as you do that through that model, teach that business system, then it goes from people sort of mouthing it to understanding it to living it and it being part of their bones. Now, the power that's within people who've got the right interior ideas and drive is enormous, because, you know, as I say to our people, Nelson Mandela was once somebody's employee. You know, Steve Jobs was once somebody's employee. It was just that when he was at Atari, they couldn't find a good way to use his talents and let him fully express what he could do. And so he walked out the door one day because, you know, everyone wanted him kept in a corner because he was a bit smelly, and went off and created $2 trillion worth of value for someone else. Right. So these great people, I always remembered as a young guy, I was within these businesses and I was like trying to make the business better and help the boss and do good things, but it was like no one was interested. So I want our business to be about how do we get people, lift them up, let them do what they can do within the context of our business, continually improving that structure and what we're on about. And that's proved very, you know, very effective. It's an unusual way to think.
Do you see it translating to organic revenue growth?
Yeah, so we've grown at about 30% CAGR over 15 years. Half of that's been organic, half of that's been acquisition. In our industry, if you look at the top 10 largest firms globally, you can't get to scale purely organically. And the reason is you've got to bring people with you. And so when we acquire a business, we get a whole group of people, existing teams and infrastructure. It's not just the clients that we get that we wouldn't be able to do at the same rate. So I feel like organic growth and inorganic growth acquisitions are like two wings of a bird. You know, you don't want to be a bird with one wing, and it wouldn't matter what that wing was. You'd just be going around in circles.
sounds really familiar to Constellation Software, which we talked a little about earlier. But because I'm seeing a lot of I'm seeing it align with Constellation Software's model a lot. But maybe that's just how I'm thinking about it. Did you model this acquisition / organic revenue growth combination from another business that you've seen in the world? Was it like a combination of Berkshire, McDonald's, Walmart, or are you seeing it from, did you find it from somewhere else?
Yeah, literally. So I read on all the private equity firms in 2005. I read on, every founding story I could, every book I possibly could, on every M&A book I could. And what in my mind, I was trying to build a holdco, a Berkshire Hathaway holdco. So Keller Gardner's Group Holdings is a holding company. And I knew that you couldn't just do what PE firms would traditionally do, which was good financial structuring, but the lesson that they were getting post sort of GFC also was that you also had to be operationally, amazing. You shouldn't buy an asset that you can't operationally improve. And so I said to myself, we need to be able to double the profits and rip out 2/3 of the working capital just at the financial level of a business in order to justify getting involved. We need to just buy businesses that we know we can dramatically improve. And so it's really Berkshire at the holdco level, and these businesses in particular, Disney, Walmart, McDonald's, Apple to a large degree, and Ritz-Carlton around the client offer, and then Berkshire Hathaway at the financial level, that were influential to me. The other big mindset was Bank of America, largest bank in the world, had this long-term acquisition program where they documented the system of how they made acquisitions. And I'd read about that and I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'd looked at how McDonald's continually opened stores and opened territories, and I was very much influenced by that. I saw Constellation and Danaher and said, okay, these are great businesses. They make a huge amount of sense to be thinking in that way. But I really see Constellation's business system, if you like, and Danaher's business system as being very akin to McDonald's business system, who I think probably have the best business system in the world. And so I was looking at them, and then the other guy that I hugely admire is Bernard Arnault with Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. And I really thought that what he did with Heritage Luxury Brands was take a luxury brand and re-engineer that business to make it fit for the 21st century. And so I was thinking, okay, when I buy a leading accounting firm that's old, it needs, operationally, its IT sorted, its marketing, its recruitment, its people offer, et cetera, but it fundamentally has a very excellent market position, but it just needs a bunch of grunt put under it. So they were the businesses, it's really at the holdco Berkshire at the operating level, much more like Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, what they would do in a brand situation. They centralized finance and advertising, purchasing globally, while leaving the brands with an individual personality. I said we would centralize finance, marketing, IT, recruitment, ops, legal, etc., because there was more that we should do, and the local office really should look after its people and its clients. So they're the businesses that most had that mindset. Constellation's a great business. So as we've studied it, it's done over 600 transactions as we understand, in over 100 countries, 25 years. We see what they've done as very akin to the market, the global market opportunity that will ultimately exist for us if we do, what we're doing well in the circle of competence we have in the market that we've got. So we're very mindful of going deep before you go wide. So when I started, it was to own the private business owner accounting market in Sydney. And that came from Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. And the insight there was, if you think of Hermès Paris, or Bulgari, Roma, or Rolex, Switzerland, whenever they go to another place, Tiffany, New York, if you go to Japan, in Tokyo, there's Tiffany, New York, and you're in Tokyo. But it's brought a bit of its DNA to that market. I said our blue is really representative of Sydney Harbour. Sydney's a great city, and it's known as an innovative, challenging type of former penal colony. And And I thought that challenger mindset very much suited the brand's DNA, and that what I would aim to do over, the very long term would be to bring that challenging mindset to be present in any market we played, but to first win at home. So to own that market in Sydney. Now, today we're the 23rd largest firm in the country. We should do about 57, 58 million of revenue this year. 55 of that will be in Sydney. That's a very large private client firm in Sydney. That's probably the largest private client firm in Sydney, potentially including any of the big four. So my mindset was win somewhere first rather than just go scattergun and try and do just stuff everywhere.
Brett, Andrew, we've got 4 minutes, Brett, before our next meeting at 6:30.
Like, Andrew, that's what we don't say too much about publicly, right? Most people in Australia, if you say Constellation Software, they're like, pass the cheese. They have no fucking idea what that company is. They have none. And so rather than me spending any time saying anything about it, we're just smashing away building the company one step at a time.
Yeah, it's good. That's exactly what we should be doing anyway. So look, as I'm sure all the shareholders would agree, focus on that, and let the results do the talking.
Build a business, and then what's happened as a result of that, now we've got really amazing people that we love chatting with, like myself and other people around the world who are really thoughtful about, Cunningham talks about quality investors, quality shareholders being people that are thoughtful, have a criteria, want to take them, understand the business, take a meaningful position for a long time. As we've got to meet and spend more and more time with those people, it's just improving the business. It's radically awesome. And let's catch up again soon so I can hear more about Ukraine, in particular the skiing in Georgia. I knew there was a low tax rate.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't know about the skiing, Kenny. I love the snow.